Welcome back, everyone, to Chapter 5 in the section on drugs and consciousness. In the last lecture, we talked about kind of how drugs can work with our consciousness. We talked about tolerance and dependence and withdrawals and all that fun stuff. But now for the part that I'm sure you're way more interested in, the drugs specifically. So, let's break down psychoactive drugs. So psychoactive drugs are chemicals similar to those found naturally in our brain. In other words, they're chemicals that are similar to those neurotransmitters. So they act like neurotransmitters in the brain. And so these molecules or chemicals can alter consciousness by changing the chemical processes in the neurons. So they can cause the neurons in the brain to either fire or not fire, depending on kind of which neurotransmitter they're kind of mimicking. So the effects of a drug can actually be due to a few different things. The first one is obviously its chemical properties. So which neurotransmitter is the drug most similar to chemically? And then, of course, there's other effects of a drug as well. So one's mental set. So really, your beliefs or expectations about the drug can also lead to how the drug acts. So, for instance, let's again talk about, let's say, marijuana this time. Say you haven't taken marijuana before and you don't know what to expect. You've never heard of it, you just take it. You're going to have a different experience with marijuana than if you were to, say, have a bunch of friends or watch a bunch of movies where they take marijuana and they talk about getting like all laughy and getting the munchies, and they talk about other people's experiences with drugs. So now, because you've watched all these movies and talked to friends that all tell you when you take marijuana, you're going to get super laughy, very chill, and you're going to get the munchies. Well, now when you take marijuana the first time, because you're expecting all of that, it's probably going to happen. And it's not really due to the chemical properties, but more about your mental set, or because of your beliefs and expectations about the drug. Now, that's not to say that if you never heard about marijuana, then you wouldn't also experience those. But different drugs can affect people differently. So you might not have experienced those effects of marijuana if you'd never heard those expectations before. I hope that makes sense. So there's multiple different types of psychoactive drugs. And so I have a table here that I think will be helpful for you guys. This table I took from an older textbook. I think your textbook has a similar image. But pretty much what we're going to focus on is the class of the drugs. So that's in bold here. And then for each drug, what is its typical effect? So what do we usually see what happens when someone takes the drug? The last column is the overdose effect. So if someone overdoses on a drug, what happens to that? Now, you don't need to focus on this right now. We are going to break them all down, but this might be a really good table that maybe you'll want to have up during the exam for quick looking. Or maybe it's just a really good way to maybe, empty out all of this text and use it as a study tool and see if you can replicate this table by yourself. So the first group of drugs we're going to talk about are depressants. So depressant drugs depress the effect of the central nervous system. In other words, they kind of have a calming effect. They act in kind of like a sedative a bit, and they have some hypnotic means in other words, they produce some sleep-inducing type of effects. And so we see this a lot in two of the major types of depressants that we're going to talk about. The first one is alcohol. So alcohol is a depressant. It's calming and sleep-inducing. So you've probably noticed that the more you drink, the more kind of sleepy you get, and that's just because of the type of drug it is. The second type of drug we're going to talk about, or second of the depressant drugs we're going to talk about, are sedative hypnotics. And so these can be broken down into barbiturates and benzodiazepines. We're not going to talk about these two quite as much. We're going to mostly focus on alcohol in this class. So let's talk about alcohol. So it can be confusing because alcohol is a depressant. And we just said that depressants create this calming effect and make you feel sleepy. But also, I'm sure you guys have, if you're over 18, or not, I don't judge, then I'm sure you've experienced this where you'll take like shots or something when you're going out with friends or at a party to get like jacked up, to get like really excited and get the night going. And so you take alcohol to kind of boost your mood almost, to like feel better and get more excited. And that seems like it's the opposite of what a depressant should do, right? Well, in small doses, then alcohol does have this effect of giving an elevated mood. And what it does is it makes you feel more relaxed. So it doesn't really like jack you up. What it does is it just lowers your inhibition so you don't care as much. It impairs your judgment. So really, you're breaking out of your shell. You're not being as restricted because of this feeling of relaxation and an elevated mood that the depressant alcohol does. Now, of course, in larger doses, first off, that's where you can really start to see, when people get sleepy, some people pass out from alcohol. And with really large doses, then that's where we really see the sedative and depressant effects of alcohol. And so when I'm talking about larger doses, this is when you have a blood alcohol content of about 0.05 to 0.1. So again, these are large amounts. So when you're feeling this, if you're feeling more tired, if you're feeling these depressive effects, you shouldn't be driving. Pretty much. If you've had a small dose and you only have elevated mood and lowered inhibitions, you can probably drive a little bit. I still wouldn't recommend it. But with larger doses, do not drive, please. Okay? So with larger doses, then you see the brain centers become depressed. Your thinking will slow. You have impaired concentration. You have trouble walking. Your muscular coordination is really impaired. And again, this is why we don't drink and drive. So again, short-term effects of intoxication are directly related to blood alcohol content. So again, blood alcohol content on the y-axis here, and then the number of drinks. And most places, when you're considered too drunk to drive is when your blood alcohol to content is at 0.08. And if we follow that number over, we can see for a 120-pound woman, that's 2 drinks. For a 120-pound man and a 160-pound woman, that's about 2.5 drinks. So really, 1 drink is good. 2 drinks, for most people, that's too many drinks to be driving. Okay, now if we look at a 160-pound man, then for 0.08, then he can have 3 drinks, about 3.5 drinks. But again, to be safe, maybe a 160-pound man should have 2 drinks, and everyone else should just have 1 drink if they're going to drive. Of course, the safest is 0. And again, this is for 0.08. Now, some places in Canada use 0.05. So if we look at 0.05, that is... For everyone, that is, you can have 1.5 drinks, and that's it. So again, really be careful when you're drinking and driving. I just want you guys to be safe when you're doing this. But again, I mean, I love visiting different breweries and wineries. I think it's super fun, but I just don't drive. So maybe take that example. Just women do tend to absorb alcohol faster. That's not saying we can't handle our alcohol, ladies. That just means our blood absorbs it faster. So our blood alcohol level increases faster. But again, sometimes, I've totally drank some guys under the table before. Like, don't underestimate us, guys. That being said, do it safely. And that's one of the PSAs for today. So let's move on to the second set of drugs. Stimulants. So stimulants are the opposite of a depressant. So stimulants rev up your central nervous system. That is why when you take these, then people tend to get like really excited. They have like more energy, that kind of thing. So some popular ones are nicotine, so like cigarettes, cocaine, and amphetamines. Now we're gonna kind of talk specifically about nicotine and cocaine in the next few slides. But what I do want to talk to you guys about first is that so stimulants, one stimulant also is obviously caffeine, right? And it can be dangerous to mix stimulants and depressants, okay? So try not to mix your stimulants with your depressants. So don't have cocaine and alcohol. That can be very dangerous because it really confuses your body. One revs up the central nervous system, one puts it to sleep. And so your body gets confused and you're more likely to overdose or have some really negative effects. Now, obviously, like I said, one stimulant is caffeine. So it is sometimes popular to mix stimulants and depressants in the form of Red Bull and vodka. Red Bull is a stimulant, vodka is a depressant. Or people that have like an Irish coffee, that's whiskey, which is a depressant, and coffee, which is a stimulant. So that is one time when mixing a stimulant and a depressant is kind of less negative, but that's because caffeine isn't as strong of a stimulant. Now, even with Red Bull and vodka, or other mixtures of stimulants and depressants, what we actually see is an increased risk of fighting and violence and other really just stupid activities that kind of come with binge drinking and mixing stimulants with that. Again, that's one reason why we don't want to mix our stimulants and depressants, because it's not only dangerous to you, but it's dangerous to those around you. So that's another PSA for the day. There's going to be a few, but again, enjoy safely and do what you want. But now let's talk about specifically nicotine. So nicotine works by, it activates the receptors sensitive to the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. And so when having nicotine, people will report the feelings of stimulation as well as relaxation and alertness. So they'll feel more energized, but also more relaxed. So some people start smoking as a way to relieve anxiety, but then they'll also feel more alert. So again, it's a stimulant. There is this thing called adjustive value. So nicotine enhances the positive emotional reactions, and then it minimizes the negative emotional reactions. So that's an adjustive value, where it enhances the good and minimizes the negative. And again, that's why a lot of people become addicted to nicotine because of these effects. Now, a second major type of stimulant would be cocaine. So cocaine, you probably know, was first developed as like a medicine It was one of the key ingredients in Coca-Cola. It's not anymore because now we know there's some negative effects to it. But cocaine is the most powerful natural stimulant. It blocks reuptake of norepinephrine and dopamine. In other words, remember, these neurotransmitters leave the presynaptic cell, connect to the postsynaptic cell, and then are supposed to be kind of vacuumed up and recycled. And what cocaine does is it prevents the recycling of these neurotransmitters, so now they're acting on the postsynaptic cell too much. So cocaine causes overreaction of the postsynaptic cell. And so what some people that use cocaine can report is they get this feeling of euphoria. They get this enhanced mental and physical capacity. They get the stimulation, decreases in hunger, kind of an indifference to pain. They'll feel the pain, but they don't care. And then a sense of well-being accompanied by diminished fatigue. So again, we see that stimulation where people on cocaine tend to just go, until they kind of crash or take more. They do have a decrease in hunger. So again, people that are dependent on cocaine or addicted tend to be a lot skinnier. You might have heard the term cocaine body. And again, that's because these people just aren't hungry, so they're not eating as much, but then they also will have enhanced stimulation, so they might be going to the gym a lot. So they'll be ripped, but super skinny, and it's a weird look. Personally, not my thing. But again, to each their own. Now, so we talked about depressants and stimulants. The other type of drugs we're going to talk about a little bit more quickly. And so let's talk about those. So the next type we're going to talk about is a sedative. So sedatives can also be known as hypnotics. And so these are used to treat acute anxiety and insomnia. So high doses will have a strong depressant effect. So even though a sedative or hypnotic is a different type of drug than a depressive, they act the same. And there's actually some kinds of drugs that are cross-listed as both a sedative and a depressant. And we see that down here where we talk about the three different categories. We have barbiturates and benzodiazepines, which remember I said that those are types of depressants. And they are, but they're also types of sedatives, so they kind of work as both. Now, if you have too much of a sedative, so high doses of sedative can lead to unconsciousness, coma, and even death. And that's why it's very dangerous when people are given barbiturates, benzodiazepines, or non-barbiturates to treat anxiety or insomnia, and why drugs need to, why you need prescriptions. Now, there's the three categories. I have examples of those in parentheses here. You don't need to know that. You don't need to know these drug names. I just wanted to give you some examples because you've probably heard of, I'm guessing at least Valium and Xanax you've probably heard of. So that's what sedatives are. They are used to treat anxiety and insomnia. They have a very calming effect, but in too high doses, they can be very dangerous. Now, the next type we're going to talk about are narcotics. Now, sometimes when you're watching like a police show or something, then they'll talk about narcotics and they kind of include all dangerous drugs. But narcotics are actually a specific type of drug. Cocaine is not a narcotic. Marijuana is not a narcotic. The two main narcotics are opiates and heroin. Okay, so opiates would be heroin, morphine, and codeine. So really, you can see they end in the INE. And the main narcotic that people are busting on those TV shows are opium and heroin. Okay? And what opiates do is they relieve pain and induce sleep. So really, the very first one, and what's very natural and occurs in in nature, is opium. Okay, it comes from poppy seeds. It's over here. That's the poppy plant. And opium was first used to relieve pain, especially in patients. And then people are trying to create and alter that to be more specific. And that's where we got the development of heroin, which was meant to be a medicine, and then morphine and codeine as well, which of these two are still used today in hospitals for pain relief, but heroin is not a medicine anymore because it had too big of an effect and not enough medical relief. So that's the mini history of heroin. Is it was made to be like morphine, and then it was too addictive. And obviously you've probably heard that morphine and codeine are very regulated, and again, that's because they're very addictive. So they work great to relieve pain, but they actually do kind of too good of a job, and people become addicted. So heroin specifically conveys a sense of euphoria, so an intense pleasurable effect, and this can last 3 to 4 hours for one dose. And someone that's addicted to heroin will experience heroin withdrawal syndrome if a new dose is not taken. In other words, they experience withdrawal after a single dose. So even if it's your very first time taking heroin, you can still get heroin withdrawal symptoms after that first dose. And again, that's why it's not used in the medical field as much, because morphine and codeine don't have this withdrawal syndrome. Let's talk about the next type, the psychedelics and hallucinogens. Very exciting drugs. So hallucinogenic or psychedelic drugs, they're called that because they produce a dramatic alterations in perception, mood, and thought. Now, the most popular ones would be LSD, magic mushrooms, PCP, and ecstasy. Now, some researchers want to classify marijuana as a mild hallucinogen. We're going to talk about marijuana separately in a bit. But for this class, for psychedelics, hallucinogens, I would say just remember LSD, ecstasy, magic mushrooms, And again, these are hallucinogens. They produce hallucinations, or they can, where you have perception without sensation. So LSD and other hallucinogens, what they do is they interfere with serotonin at the synapse. So they're associated with areas of the brain that are rich in receptors for their neurotransmitter dopamine. And so for this, you'll want to know that LSD and hallucinogens interfere with serotonin and dopamine, and that they can produce dramatic shifts in perceptions and consciousness. So it's very common that you'll get this clearing of thought. All thoughts will leave, and then you'll get changes in sensation and perceptions, and you'll get this kind of mythical experience. Now, some people, not all, also experience some panic or paranoid delusions. So these would be negative effects. You'll see confusion and depression, as well as bodily discomfort. So again, you're getting these hallucinations, but sometimes these are bad hallucinations. So again, maybe be careful with hallucinogens. Now, again, there are other hallucinogens. Ecstasy, also known as MDMA, has both stimulant and hallucinogenic properties, but it is listed as just a hallucinogen. And it produces a cascade of the neurotransmitter serotonin in the brain. So again, it's acting on serotonin. So some side effects of ecstasy or other hallucinogens would be you get an increased blood pressure, you see depression, nausea, blurred vision, liver problems with long-term hallucinogen use, some sleep disturbances. And when you're taking hallucinogens, you may have memory loss about what happened during the time of that, and some damage on the neurons themselves. Now, the last one we're going to talk about is marijuana. So I have marijuana separate. You'll see a lot of scientists in textbooks will put marijuana separate because we don't really know where to classify it. It kind of fits in multiple areas, but if we have to categorize it, it's most closely related to a hallucinogen, but it does have some sedative effects as well. So, we like to just put it by itself. So marijuana used to be the most frequently used illegal drug in Canada. Obviously, it's now legal. Very exciting. And the effects of marijuana itself is due to the chemical THC. That's what gives you that high feeling. And so when we talk about marijuana as a drug, we're talking about the THC. So the THC is what's most common to a hallucinogen, and then the CBD is what's similar to a sedative. So users report short-term effects of marijuana to be a sense of time slowing down. You get an enhanced sensation of touch. So again, that's where hallucinogens are similar. You get an increased appreciation for sound. People tend to experience hunger, or what we call the munchies. They tend to get giggly, and they get this feeling of well-being. Now, marijuana's intoxicating effects can last for 2 to 3 hours. So that's the peak of the effects. Depending on, obviously, the strain of marijuana and the method of consumption, then the intoxicating effects can last for longer or shorter. There's no consistent evidence for serious physiological health or fertility consequences from marijuana use. In other words, it seems to be the least destructive of the drugs. So, if you have to do a drug, marijuana is probably the best. Again, it's all up to you. I'm not telling you to use it. I'm not telling you not to. So marijuana, the chronic heavy use of marijuana can impair attention and memory. So maybe try not to smoke marijuana while studying or taking a test. But otherwise, not too many major side effects. For the test, just be able to recognize the different types of drugs and maybe come up with one example of each type. And then tell me how it works. So that's it for Chapter 5. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, let me know if you have any questions.